Mark clearly connects Jesus' baptism with his journey into the wilderness, into temptation. Neither Mark nor Jesus view temptation as a bad thing. It's an opportunity to choose. It's not something to be avoided. In fact, Jesus returns over and over again into the wilderness to face the temptation that's close at hand. Remember, toward the end of his life, as the cross got closer, he got away and he prayed, God, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. The words he used was, take this cup from me. But if this is what you want, I'll do. That's what temptation is about. Making important choices, important decisions. But as you all know, temptation can be exciting. It can be exhilarating even, right? If it wasn't, it wouldn't be a temptation. Well, Admiral Byrd, when he went to the South Pole, he was talking to one of the companions that he had on the trip, Jack O'Brien, and in the middle of a 6-month-long polar night, he asked Jack if there was anything he missed about civilization. Without even taking a moment to think about it, he said, temptation. I miss temptation. This is so boring here. I don't have anything to tempt me. Nothing to excite me, nothing to exhilarate me. Well, that's kind of how it is. John Piper says that sin gets its power by persuading me to believe that I will be more happy. The power of all temptation is in the prospect that it will make me happier. It's true. Name a temptation. Chocolate. That's a temptation. That is a pleasure. It's like, this may have a lot of calories and probably shouldn't do it, but it's going to taste so good. Temptation to fear. She said fear. Fear, not beer. That's the way. Yeah. Right. If I fear, then somehow that gives me a little control because I know what to expect. Right. Right. Okay. People will know what they should know already, and that I'm great. Yeah. Being dishonest. I can get away with something, and it'll, it depends on what it is, bring me happiness. Rob a bank. I'll get money that I need so I can cover the bills that I have, or, every temptation holds with it that little sense of you'll be happier, you'll be better off. Better off. Temptation is subtle, as you saw with Laura. It can start small, but sometimes things happen. But the thing about temptation is it asks us to ignore the consequences, or promises us that the consequences can be avoided by us. We know others might get caught, but you won't. You'll get away with it. Others have gotten away with it. There'll be no cost to you. Don't worry about it. There's always that part that's there. 4 high school boys during spring decided they just didn't want to go to school. And so they played hooky in the morning, but they went back to school in the afternoon. They told the teacher that the car they were in had a flat tire. Well, the teacher said, it's okay, you missed a quiz, but you're here now, you can take a quiz, so take a seat, get out your pencil and paper, and you can have a quiz now. And they went, great, we got away with this, right? Perfect, perfect. She said, the first question, which tire was flat? It sucks us in. We think there's no consequence to it. There was a salesman who was waiting in the purchasing agent's office, waiting to give his company's bid for a project. Well, the agent stepped out for a moment, and the salesman noticed that there on the desk was a competitor's bid. But unfortunately, right over the amount, there was a can of soda. So he reached over and he picked up the can of soda, only to discover that it had no bottom in it and it was filled with BBs. And they went everywhere, thousands of them. sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. Abraham Lincoln had that famous saying that most of us have heard. You can fool some of the people all the time, and all the people some of the time. But that's not how it ends. Remember the next line?
You can't fool all the people all the time.
You can't fool all the people all the time. And then there's another line, which is what I'm going for. But you can't fool God anytime. We have this sense that somehow we need to fool God. If we mess up, we somehow need to keep that from God, as if God wouldn't know in the first place. To face temptation, you need to be willing and able to admit your failing. Because, after all, God's not going to go, really? I didn't know that. But see, not only is God not surprised, but God is not deterred in His love and grace for us. It doesn't matter what we do. Our mess-ups are not more powerful than God's love and grace. That's the key part. Now, when we talk about going into the wilderness, being tempted, we're talking about serious stuff. We're not talking about little things. Sometimes we get distracted by the little things. William Willimon was teaching a women's Bible study on Thursday mornings. They were studying the temptations of Jesus. And Willimon asked them, have any of you ever faced temptation and with Jesus' help resisted? And so as you might expect, one of the women said, just that week before, she'd been at the grocery store and there had been some confusion at the checkout line, and she found herself out in the parking lot with a loaf of bread she hadn't paid for. And she said, I knew the right thing to do was to go in and pay for it, and she went and paid for it. Yeah, that's good enough. Then he asked if anyone else would like to share. A young woman who was attending the Bible study for the first time raised her hand. See, Verlene was not like everybody else. She was from the wrong side of town, and this was the first time she was at the Bible study. She didn't know she wasn't supposed to be honest. She said, a couple of years ago, I was into cocaine really big. You know what that's like. You know that stuff can make you crazy. She told the women how a few years earlier, her and her boyfriend had robbed a convenience store. She said it was like taking candy from a baby. Well, just recently, her boyfriend asked her to pull off another heist. She said she wasn't going to do it. And he beat her. But she had this to say about it. She said, that was the only time in my life I ever said no to anything. Through the stunned silence, Willimon kind of muttered out, well, yeah, that's resisting temptation. That's the sort of thing this text is about. And then he led them into closing prayer. See, we're happy to hear these little innocuous things that don't really make a difference in the scheme of things. I mean, should you do the right thing? Sure. You know, should you be good? Sure. But that's not what temptation is about. Temptation is about the heavy things. Open up your heart. And when people do that, we have a hard time dealing with that. Partly, I think, because we don't want to admit those things that rest deep in our heart. Those things, those temptations that we need to come to terms with. Sometimes we get confused about temptation. It's not about having a set of morals. It's not about following things legalistically. You can't be a good witness if no one wants to listen to you. And if somebody keeps telling you about these little things that don't really matter, how you should be good, they're going to stop listening. But if you're real, if you're honest, they'll hear you. And your relationship will grow. Remember how, when I was in Saratoga, the first church I was a part of in California, Martha had a couple of wild kids. I mean, really wild kids. And so one day the girl was acting out, and Martha came to me and she said, go tell her to be good, to stop doing what she's doing. And I thought, man, how insulting that is. The picture of the minister is one who tells other people to be good. That's not what the gospel's about. The gospel's about follow Jesus in the difficult things of life. You know, the Renegade Gospel we're going to be looking at in the study talks about how the church has made a Sunday school Jesus, you know, a safe Jesus, a mild Jesus. That's not what the gospel's about. That's not what temptation is about. It's about the deep things. It's about what's really in your heart. It's not about the little things. It's not about being a good person. It's a kindergarten teacher who became ill suddenly, and so they rushed to try and find a fill-in substitute for her, and they found someone who never really worked much with that age, and she didn't know quite what to do, but she thought, well, they're kids. I'll tell them stories. And so she told those kindergartners story after story after story, and after each one of the stories she would say, and the moral of this story is, and she'd tell them whatever the moral was. Well, finally she got better and came back to class, and one little kid came up to her and said, I'm so glad you're back. I like you so much more than that other teacher. Now, every teacher wants to hear that, right? But instead of just saying thank you, she said, well, what is it that you like about me? What do you like me more? The child said, well, it's because you have no morals. Those people anyway, right? It's not about the little things, it's about trying to be good. Temptation at its heart is a serious choice. Will I follow Jesus? Will I do what God wants? Or will I do what I want, what I like, what seems best, which serves me best? This Lenten season, to have a cross, I invite you to wear it daily or put it someplace where you will see it daily. And what I want you to do is then begin to think about, what can I do today to follow Jesus more closely? What can I do to help someone else in need? Not will I have a soda this Lenten season or not, but what can I do to help someone else? Where am I taking something away from somebody else who needs it more? Tommy Barnett was a pastor who was preaching a sermon. In this case, Elvis was in the building. Now, Elvis has Christian roots, and he grew up singing gospel. After the sermon, which was very moving, Elvis came up to Tommy and he said to him, what if I renounce show business and find that serving God won't bring joy to my heart? He stood face to face with the temptation, and we know what he chose. We know what he chose. But that's what temptation is about. At the heart of things, will you do things your own way, or will you follow God? Wilderness temptation is about serious stuff, deep things. There's a priest who was the priest in charge of a convent, and so part of his duties was to hear the confessions of all the nuns there. He said it drove him crazy. He said it was like being pelted with popcorn. All these little things, I didn't eat right, or I said a bad word, or I wasn't nice, all these little things. And what he was saying is, they didn't open up their hearts and talk about the serious stuff of life. The serious stuff. That's what we're called into. Someone said, my mother raised me in the 16th century and kicked me out in the 21st. I didn't know what to do. The Jesus of the church is often the 16th century Jesus. Do this, do that, be good, don't do that, don't do that. And that's what we teach our children. And then they get out into the real world and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to face those big things. Because we have a mild, loving, cute Jesus. I was at a Board of Ordained Ministry meeting with a number of pastors this week, and for a devotional, someone brought in a devotional by a UCC pastor named Vince Hamlin. Now, his devotion was mostly for clergy, but it was open to others. And so, the passage that was used as the beginning was from Titus 1, which says, as bishop, as God's steward, must be blameless. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or addicted to wine or violent or greedy for gain. He must be hospitable, a lover of goodness, prudent, upright, devout, and self-controlled. Kind of like me, right? He had this to say, He said, since I am a minister, people are always apologizing to me. When they drink or curse, when they talk about sex or anger, suddenly they'll notice me standing there disguised as a human being. And gasp, red-faced, I'm sorry, I forgot you were a pastor. These are usually people who don't know me very well. I try to set them at ease by taking a swig of whatever it is they're having and swearing back at them. But it rarely has the desired effect. He said, I am suspicious of these instructions in Titus, that the church needs blameless leaders. On the one hand, I recognize that like every clergy person, I wear an invisible sign that says something like, God is watching, but less crazy. And I take seriously the call to be an example of how a person of faith behaves as best I can. On the other hand, I fear that the pretense of the perfect pastor gets us into trouble. When we require our leaders to be blameless, we wind up with clergy who get good at keeping secrets. And we wind up with church members who believe that faith is only for perfect people. Perhaps what we need is just what we have. Angry, sexy, swearing clergy who often disappoint us, but who on their best days point us imperfectly toward perfect love. As she was reading this to us, we all nodded our heads. We've all been there. But as I thought about this, if you change the word pastor to the word Christian, this becomes about you as well. How many times have you been at a party or something, and people will say something, and then they'll realize, oh, they're a Christian. And they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Or whatever. We're not called to be perfect. We're called into temptation so that we can make the big choices. Big choices. The things that are most important. Don't get caught up in all these little things of, oh, I need to be nice. I walked by Braxton and I didn't say hi, I have to repent of that, We just get caught up in so many of those little things. Make this season a time where you go into temptation. You face the important things of your life, tough decisions, choices that you want versus what God may want for you.